Hello again, this is Ryan Runcie. Welcome to Runcie Studios, an artist safe space and art haven. Today we are going to be continuing our talk on efficiency. Last time we talked about studio setup, talked about making sure things were accessible in your studio space, and that you were able to avoid buying new materials because you misplaced or lost old ones. For today's episode, one thing that I'm going to jump into talking about is how to get the most out of the materials that you have, saving materials, cleaning materials properly. These are the practices that are going to save you just as much money in the long run as our first tips on efficiency. I think the main difference is the tips in part one are more about getting started and breaking down barriers that stop you from getting to work in general. But now, part two, we're actually getting to work. We're actually um, able to put our time in effectively, but maybe we're wasting too much on the back end. Maybe we're putting in almost just as much, if not more, cost into the painting than our actual profits. And so if you want to do this as a business, this is a key component as an artist. You really don't have a choice. If you want to continue to buy lots of paint and waste lots of paint and make beautiful artwork out of wasted paint, then that's okay, I guess. But if you really want to minimize your trips to the art store, minimize how much you have to mix paint, minimize how often you have to go searching for paints and clean materials to use, then let's look at some tips on efficiency and see how we can increase your profits at the end of the day. So for me, one little tip that I've found over time, whenever I'm using charcoal or pastel, graphite, things like that, try and save those little bits. You usually break the charcoal willow. Those vine sticks, they might break and snap and turn to dust. I actually have an envelope full of graphite powder. So whenever I'm shaving charcoal or graphite pencils, I will put them into an envelope just full of graphite shavings. They're the non-wooden pencils, so all of that pencil can still be used later on if I need a nice gradation or a nice blended area in the background of a graphite work. I'll simply take out a little of those shavings, break them down farther into a powder, and I'll be able to use that for a long time. So just think about how your materials can be effectively utilized in maybe specific elements, but you're still saving materials for the long run. As a acrylic painter, one thing that I learned after years of waste is to get a proper palette. And before I talk about what I consider a proper palette, let me talk about the palettes that I personally have used that I have learned are more problematic and waste my money more so than they're just not a good palette, okay? So everyone has had either a wooden palette or a plastic palette where you just kind of squeeze your blobs of acrylic or gouache or water-based media on there. And once it's all dry, you have this cool topographic, like globby mess of colors stuck to it. And for me, at first it was okay, but once it starts to build up over years and years of paint, there's a few things you realize. All of the paint that is stuck to that is money. All of the paint that is stuck to your palette is money gone that you cannot get back to make another painting. Second thing that is a big problem with that, if you put new paint on top of those old paints, two problems occur. One is a financial problem. The second is an artistic, aesthetic problem. The first one, your brush will be destroyed trying to mix paint on a non-flat surface. So we already know how hard brushes work when they're scrubbed into surfaces, whether that's on your palette or on your canvas. But the more you scrub your brush and have to work it into odd angles and bending the bristles more and more, the more you're destroying the shape of your brush. So be really aware of how clean your palette is. If you're like digging into old holes of paint to scoop paint out and try and remix, you're gonna destroy more brushes that way. So even if you're spending money on cheaper paint and cheaper brushes, you're still gonna have to spend a good amount of money compared to someone that takes good care of a proper palette and high-end brushes. The other part of that is a huge problem, is your eyes cannot properly read colors. Unless you're mixing the exact same color on top of where you mixed it last time, your eye is going to misread the color. And I'm not saying it's because you're dumb or this and that. That is the essence of color theory, is we cannot read one color without interpreting it against another color. So be very aware of that. Be very aware of where you're placing these colors, how you're mixing them, what color is next to what. Are you creating too strong of contrasts on a dirty palette with new paints? So these things also lower your efficiency in terms of painting. Have you ever been painting and you take paint from your messy palette and you put it on your canvas? For some reason, the color is just off. It looks right on your palette and it looks wrong on your painting. It's because you're seeing colors in two different contexts, and you need to try and clean up the palette as much as possible to give you a clear color tonality relation to the painting you're working on. So now we're going to go into what I look for in a palette. I look for a reusable, sealable palette. What I have is a wet box. It's about a 16 by 20 box, plastic box with a sealing top. And then inside of that, I keep a piece of glass. It's a glass palette that is made for art. What that means is they've made sure to make it as non-porous as possible, and they've rounded and beveled the edges so that you won't accidentally snag or cut yourself with this piece of glass. Although they can be on the pricier side, I have had all of the glass palettes that I started with, the earliest one from about 8 years ago. So it's usually a great investment. For my large tabletop palette, where I mix most of my colors and do some free mixing for all the Prima paintings, I got a 19 by 31 inch glass palette from IKEA for like $31, super cheap. I think it's meant to be used in a kitchen setting, but it's a great alternative if you have the space and you like working with glass. You can leave this piece of glass on any tabletop and you can put a gray backing onto it so that you're seeing your colors in proper relation. If not, just keep it clean, keep little like rubber padding under it so that it doesn't slide around. But it is by far one of the best investments that I've made in my studio. It has saved me so much money compared to mixing on plates or my old plastic palettes. I see a lot of different artists using tons of different materials, and the reality is some of the most professional artists on the planet have some of the messiest studios and messiest practices, but that doesn't mean they're as efficient as they want to be or could be. Of course, I can't speak on the behalf of others, but just know where you can improve, and if you see enough value in it, I would say go that way. I don't think it's something that's worth fighting against, and I don't think it's something that could ever harm you in the long run. It is certainly one of the easiest things to break and return back to your normal practices. Just as an artist, it's very easy for all of your tabletops to be covered in drawings and sketches and pencils, and you just kind of lose a sense of that organization naturally. But if you can do enough to save you a little money and keep your creativity flowing day to day and not stifled because you have to go to Jerry's Artorama to pick up a tube of paint, your workflow and how much you enjoy your work in general is going to increase so much so. So if you have any other tips that I have left out, feel free to add them in. We got one more topic in terms of efficiency we're going to break down. So you guys, that's this episode for today. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like this episode down below. Subscribe to the channel if you want some more. If not, that's cool too. Until next time.